Okay, so let's unpack this. We walk around in a world that feels, well, incredibly solid.
Totally. You bump into things, you sit on chairs.
Hmm.
It all seems very real, very tangible.
But what if, just what if that feeling of solidness isn't like the whole story?
It's a head scratcher, definitely.
And it's an idea that keeps popping up in really surprising places. You've got cutting-edge quantum physics on one side.
And ancient Buddhist wisdom on the other, both kind of pointing towards this non-solidness.
Exactly. It's fascinating how this seemingly paradoxical idea that the world might not be inherently solid becomes this point of connection.
Yeah, between these two really different ways of exploring reality. You have like millennia-old contemplative traditions.
Engaging with the newest, most, well, mind-bending discoveries about how the universe fundamentally works. It's wild.
It really is.
So for this deep dive, we're plunging right into that relationship between Buddhism and science. Our mission really is to explore where their understandings of reality seem to, resonate.
And also where they diverge, where they offer pretty different perspectives.
Yeah, and we've got a really interesting mix of sources to help us navigate this. We're looking at the Wikipedia article on Buddhism and science, gives a good overview.
Right, the broad strokes.
Then there's a Reddit thread, really lively, where people are grappling with what emptiness actually means.
Always interesting to see those discussions unfold.
Definitely. Plus a book, Quantum Buddhism, Dancing in Emptiness, sounds intriguing.
Oh, yeah.
An academic paper digging into quantum entanglement and its metaphysical side.
Okay. Getting technical.
A little. And some excerpts from Century of Science about the quantum revolution, plus a YouTube transcript looking at parallels between quantum physics and this Buddhist idea of emptiness.
Wow. Okay, so quite a range.
Yeah, real mix.
And that variety is so valuable, I think, because it lets us see how this whole conversation has sort of evolved.
Right. From those early attempts to find common ground.
To modern physicists going, hang on, this sounds familiar, echoing some ancient ideas.
And even the debates within Buddhism itself about how to interpret all this stuff.
Exactly.
And that's what we're here to do for you, the listener. You want to get your head around complex stuff, quickly but properly.
And hopefully we can guide you through this fascinating territory.
Yeah, we're aiming to spark some genuine aha moments, without making your head explode.
Always the goal.
We'll be teasing out these core Buddhist ideas like impermanence, emptiness, and seeing where they might just kind of echo the weirdness of the quantum world.
And this is where it gets really compelling. But, it's really important to get this straight from the start. This idea that Buddhism is like naturally aligned with science. It isn't some ancient, obvious thing.
Right, not at all. Our sources make that clear.
It's actually a more recent development. Really took hold in the 19th century. There's a term for it, Buddhist modernism.
Okay, Buddhist modernism. And we saw some key names linked with that, right? Like Migettuwate, Gunananda, Anagarika Dharmapala.
Yep. And others like Paul Karras, Shakusen, D.T. Suzuki, even Henry Olcott and Edwin Arnold.
These were thinkers who were actively engaging with the big scientific ideas of their day, like evolution.
Exactly. They were right in the thick of it. And they weren't just like nodding along to science.
Yeah.
They were actively reinterpreting core Buddhist principles, things like Dharma, through a scientific lens. Sometimes even suggesting Dharma itself was a kind of natural law.
Interesting. And Henry Olcott's Buddhist Catechism. That sounds like a perfect example.
It really is.
Sounds like he was trying to find natural explanations for things that might have seemed, well, supernatural before.
Yeah, exploring things like hypnotism, what they call occult science back then.
Yeah.
Trying to understand some of the Buddha's reported abilities in a new light.
So faced with this rise of scientific thinking, they were basically asking, does our tradition clash with this, or does it actually fit? Maybe even offer something deeper.
Precisely. And their answer, in different ways, was a strong, no, it fits, maybe even better. And it's also key that this Buddhist modernism wasn't like one single thing. The Wikipedia article points that out.
Different flavors.
Yeah, different views among, say, American Buddhist modernists. Some just saw Buddhism as more compatible with science than maybe Christianity was. They thought future science would eventually prove Buddhist ideas right.
Okay.
Others, like Paul Karras, went even further. He actually called Buddhism the religion of science, like the ultimate rational path.
Wow. Okay, so that historical context is super important. This isn't some timeless harmony, but a specific historical effort to bridge these worlds.
Exactly. It's a conversation with a history.
But looking back even further, it seems like even in the really early Buddhist texts, there were things that encouraged kind of rational thinking, right? Not just faith.
Absolutely. There's this concept in the Pali Canon, Dhammavikaya. It means impartial investigation of reality.
Dhammavikaya.
And there's a real emphasis on looking closely at your own experience, your own mind. That focus on direct examination. People often see parallels with the scientific method there.
Right. And the Kalama Sutta comes up a lot here, doesn't it?
Oh, constantly. It's a classic.
That's the one where the Buddha talks to those villagers who are totally confused because everyone's telling them different things.
That's the one. And that key bit is quoted all the time. You know, don't just believe something because it's tradition or you heard it somewhere or it's in a book.
Or because it sounds logical, or even because your teacher said so.
Exactly. You have to investigate for yourself. Does this actually lead to good results or bad ones? Does it work?
That emphasis on personal checking, not just taking someone's word for it, that feels very aligned with a scientific mindset.
It really does. It suggests a tradition that, you know, at its core, values critical thinking and looking at your own experience, empiricism of a sort.
Okay, so we've got this thread of rational inquiry early on, and there's this modern movement actively trying to line things up with science. Let's dig into some specific points where they seem to connect. The first big one is impermanence.
Yes, Anicca. The Buddhist doctrine of Anicca. This profound understanding that absolutely everything is always changing. Nothing stays fixed.
Nothing at all. And it's not just some abstract idea, is it? It's really central to Buddhist practice, how you deal with life's ups and downs.
Totally practical.
And our sources mention the astrophysicist Train Suan Thun seeing a direct parallel there. He points to our modern scientific view of the universe. It's fundamentally dynamic, always expanding, always moving right down to the tiniest level.
Yeah, constant flux.
Yeah.
And Bhikkhu Yanajivako, another base in this, takes it a step further.
How so?
He suggests that modern science has kind of abandoned substance theory, this old idea that things are made of some underlying, unchanging stuff.
Ah, okay, like little permanent building blocks.
Right. Science doesn't really see it that way anymore.
Yeah.
And he says that rejection of fixed substance really lines up with the Buddhist idea of impermanence. The world isn't static blocks. It's more like a continuous flow of temporary events, arising and passing away.
Which flows nicely into maybe the most intriguing and talked about connection point, emptiness, shunyata, and its possible links to quantum physics. Now, this is where things can get a bit, well, as we said, mind-bending.
It definitely can. And it's so crucial to be clear from the get-go. Emptiness in Buddhism does not mean just nothingness or some kind of void.
Right, not nihilism.
No. Our sources, like that Reddit thread, refers to the absence of inherent existence. The term is svabhava.
Svabhava. Okay, say more about that.
It translates roughly as innate nature or own being. It's the idea that something exists independently, all by itself, without needing anything else to define it or make it exist.
Self-sufficient existence.
Yeah. And Buddhism fundamentally says, nope, nothing exists like that. Everything is interconnected, interdependent.
And Nagarjuna, that major Buddhist philosopher, he basically concluded nothing has svabhava.
Exactly. His whole point was to show that this idea of independent own being just doesn't hold up under analysis.
Okay. So nothing exists purely on its own, from its own side.
That's the core idea. And that's where some physicists are going, this sounds familiar.
Ah, the quantum connection.
Yes. The Wikipedia article mentions things like the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. One way to think about it is that particles don't have fixed properties just sitting there waiting to be measured.
The properties only become definite when you measure them.
Kind of. It challenges the idea of them being like tiny solid balls with fixed identities. And Erwin Schrödinger apparently described particles as just instantaneous events.
Instantaneous events.
Which some people see as echoing that Buddhist view of reality being fleeting, dependently arisen phenomena, not solid, enduring things.
And then you've got Carlo Rovelli, the physicist.
A big name.
He actually brings up Nagarjuna in his book Helgoland. He argues Nagarjuna's philosophy, Madhyamaka, really clicks with the relational interpretation of quantum mechanics.
What's the relational interpretation, basically?
Rovelli sees reality as this complex web of interactions. Interdependence is fundamental. You don't need some underlying independent essence holding it all together. It is the relationships.
Wow. So the relationships are the reality, in a sense.
That seems to be the idea he's exploring. And Vladko Vedrol, another physicist, he says it even more directly in his book Decoding Reality. He states quantum physics is very much in agreement with Buddhistic emptiness. Okay, that's pretty blunt.
His argument is that fundamentally you can never isolate some ultimate, independent thing in itself. Everything just exists by convention, defined by how it relates to other things.
Which sounds very much like that Madhyamaka view that reality as we grasp it is conceptual relational.
Exactly. And that YouTube transcript we looked at, it even hinted that this connection isn't just like a neat intellectual parallel. It suggested it could actually be transformative for how we understand ourselves and the universe.
It's pretty amazing, isn't it? These two incredibly different ways of investigating reality.
One through introspection, meditation over millennia.
The other through maths, experiments, particle accelerators.
And they seem to be converging on this similar picture of reality as relational, lacking, fixed, independent existence.
But there's always a but, isn't there? It's probably not quite that simple.
Definitely not. That Reddit thread on emptiness. It did a really good job showing the nuances, even the arguments within Buddhism about what emptiness really means.
Right. Someone made a great point that it's not just about breaking things down into smaller parts and finding nothing there. That's too reductionist.
Yeah, they mentioned Candrakirti's sevenfold reasoning of the chariot. Classic example.
The chariot. Yeah.
The goal isn't just to say the chariot is made of wheels and axles, which are themselves empty. It's to show that the chariot itself doesn't have some inherent chariotness existing independently.
Ah, so you can't find the essence of chariot by taking it apart.
Exactly. Because the chariot is just the label we give to the collection and relationship of those parts. It doesn't exist from its own side. The reasoning aims to refute the inherent existence of the whole thing.
Okay, so it's deeper than just it's made of empty parts. It's that the very idea of a self-contained thing is the illusion.
That's much closer. And that commenter made another really useful distinction.
Yeah.
Between what they called doorways to emptiness. Things like experiencing impermanence or understanding interdependence.
Things that lead you towards it.
Right. And the actual meaning of emptiness itself, which is more like an absence of inherent characteristics, a negation of independent arising, ultimately that negation of svabhava.
So feeling impermanence helps you get there, but emptiness itself is the understanding that there's no inherent self or essence to those changing things in the first place.
Precisely. It's a crucial distinction. Understanding impermanence intellectually is one thing.
But directly realizing the lack of inherent existence is another deeper level.
Exactly. And the discussion really stressed how practical and experiential the Buddhist teachings on emptiness are. It's not just philosophy.
Meditation, direct experience, that's key.
Essential, yeah. It's meant to be transformative, not just an idea you agree with.
So, okay. While we see these really interesting echoes between Buddhist emptiness and quantum physics, we absolutely have to remember the different frameworks, different methods,
and ultimately different goals of these two approaches.
Which brings us naturally to think about the major differences, the divergences. Where do they not align?
Good question. Even someone like the Dalai Lama, who spent decades talking with scientists.
Yeah, he's really pushed that dialogue.
He points out a fundamental difference in focus. He says Buddhism primarily studies consciousness, our inner world, from a first-person perspective. Subjective experience.
Right, how things seem to us.
Whereas science mostly focuses on the objective material world, usually from a third-person view, looking from the outside in.
And that difference in focus leads to some pretty significant disagreements, doesn't it?
Oh, definitely. Buddhism, as our sources mention, tends to push back against purely materialistic science, the kind that tries to reduce consciousness just to brain activity.
Saying mind is only matter.
Right. B. Alan Wallace, for instance, calls that kind of scientific materialism a metaphysical assumption, not a proven fact. And he thinks it actually gets in the way of real collaboration.
And Robert Thurman talks about Buddhist meditation as an inner science, right?
Exactly. Suggesting it's a rigorous way to investigate the mind, just using different tools than, say, physics uses for the external world.
A different kind of empiricism.
Perhaps. And while the Dalai Lama respects science deeply and wants spirituality to learn from it, he explicitly rejects scientism. That's the idea that only science can find truth and anything else is just noise.
But he also says spirituality needs science and science needs spirituality, a balance.
Yeah, he advocates for integration for both sides to inform each other. A middle way, you could say.
Which then leads us to some critical voices from within Buddhist studies, people like Donald Lopez Jr.
Right, he raises some important flags.
He questions this whole idea of Buddhism being uniquely rational or science-friendly. He argues that's actually a pretty recent spin, mostly from that 19th century Buddhist modernism we talked about.
So, not an inherent feature from the start.
That's his argument. He suggests traditional Buddhism often sees the Buddha's understanding as totally complete, perfect, which might make the tradition a bit resistant to new ideas from outside.
Which is obviously very different from science, where constantly finding out you were wrong and discovering new stuff is the whole point.
Exactly. Lopez even suggests that maybe, just maybe, Buddhism is actually radically incompatible with science.
Whoa, okay. Why?
Because its ultimate goal is to transcend the world, the cycle of suffering, samsara.
Whereas science is trying to understand and explain that very world.
Yeah, it's a really provocative thought. Are they ultimately pointing in opposite directions?
Definitely something to chew on.
It really is.
Yeah.
But even with these big differences in goals and methods, our sources did point to some really cutting-edge physics, where the parallels seem, well, particularly striking. Let's talk about quantum entanglement.
Ah, yes, entanglement. Spooky action at a distance, as Einstein called it.
Right. And that academic paper we had focuses specifically on this. It explains entanglement as this.
Well, it's bizarre.
Utterly bizarre.
Where two or more quantum systems get linked up, and they just don't seem to have their own independent properties anymore.
They act as one system, almost, even when they're far apart.
Yeah, their properties stay correlated instantly no matter the distance. It suggests this deep interconnectedness, this non-separability that just messes with our everyday ideas of separate objects.
It really challenges classical intuition.
And the paper argues this entanglement phenomenon supports what it calls a metaphysics of relations.
Okay, what's that?
It's the philosophical idea that relationships are actually the fundamental reality, more fundamental maybe than the individual things that are in those relationships. So relations first, things second. Or maybe things don't even need independent properties.
Kind of. It shifts away from a metaphysics of intrinsic properties, where things are defined by their own inherent qualities first, and relations come later. Here, the relations might be primary.
That resonates strongly with some of the Buddhist ideas we discussed, like interdependence.
Doesn't it? The paper talks about non-supervenient relations in entanglement, meaning the connections don't just arise from the separate properties of the particles. The connection is deeper, more fundamental. It even distinguishes between a moderate version, where you still have things in relation, and a more radical one, where maybe you don't even need the concept of separate objects at the most basic level, just the network of relations.
That feels very close to Ravelli's web of interactions, and maybe even Nagarjuna's emptiness.
It certainly seems to point in a similar direction. It's unsettling, isn't it? What we see as solid objects might just be like nodes in a relational network.
Deeply unsettling, but also fascinating.
And the paper brings up some potentially really profound consequences for how we know things, epistemology.
How so?
It argues that if reality is fundamentally relational, as entanglement suggests, and if our knowledge also comes through interactions, through relations,
Then maybe what we can know, epistemology, lines up better with what is metaphysics.
that's the idea. It could help close that gap between our knowledge and reality itself.
Unlike the old view.
Right. If things have hidden intrinsic properties and we only ever interact with them through relations, maybe we can never truly know their fundamental essence. We're stuck interacting with the surface, the relations, potentially ignorant of the thing in itself.
But if the relations are the fundamental reality,
Then maybe our relational knowledge is getting at something fundamental. It's a complex argument, but it suggests this relational view might solve some old philosophical problems.
okay, wow. A lot to think about there.
Definitely. So to try and pull this all together for you, the listener, we've journeyed through this really complex, fascinating relationship between Buddhism and science.
Yeah, it's not straightforward.
We've seen these intriguing points where they seem to echo each other, especially around impermanence and this idea of emptiness or non-inherent existence, maybe mirroring what quantum physics is finding. But what's the main takeaway here? Is it that science is finally proving Buddhism right? Or something else?
It's definitely more nuanced than that. We've also got to remember the huge differences, the methods, the focus on consciousness versus matter, the whole debate about materialism.
Right. It's not a simple overlay.
Not at all. It's an ongoing dialogue, a rich and evolving one. And there are different interpretations of these connections within Buddhism and between Buddhism and different bits of science. It's complex.
So maybe as you go about your day, you could just pause and consider how these different ways of looking at reality, this ancient wisdom focusing on inner experience, and modern science probing the cosmos, how they might subtly shift your own view of the world and your place in it.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it leaves us with a really compelling question to ponder, doesn't it? As science keeps pushing the boundaries, digging deeper into reality with amazing tools and theories.
And as contemplative practices keep exploring the depths of consciousness,
What other surprising connections might pop up where they meet? What haven't we seen yet?
could that ancient wisdom of emptiness, that understanding of no inherent self, no independent thingness, actually give us a useful new way to make sense of the quantum world's weirdness?
Or, flip side, could scientific rigor maybe help us better understand the power and potential of Buddhist practices for transforming the mind?
It really feels like the journey of understanding here is, well, far from over.
Absolutely. And it kind of invites all of us, you included, to keep exploring, keep asking questions, stay open.
Yeah, with open minds and a spirit of genuine curiosity.